All right, well, welcome everybody. Hello, my name is Tamala Trussell, and I want to welcome you here to tonight's Chemical Recycling Myths Debunked webinar. And we really do appreciate you taking time out of your busy evening, and I'm sure you had a busy day, to come and learn more about this topic. That is streaming live through Halt the Harm Network. During this live event, we'll cut through industries, greenwashing, discuss what the so-called climate recycling is about and what it really is. We'll hear about the dangerous impacts on communities, on climate, and how it creates many hazardous toxins. So before we get started with that, though, I would like for everyone to take a moment to tell us what city and county and state you're from. A map is going to come up, and if you just type that information into the chat, then we can kind of just see where everybody's from.
Yeah, I see a lot of people coming in from the Northeast, but there's a lot of people coming in from California, West Coast, Texas. Looks like a great diverse group of people.
Yes, it does. That's awesome. All right. So while you're finishing that up, everybody, if you happen to know, if you live near a current chemical advanced recycling pyrolysis plant, or if one is proposed in your area, and if you are near any of that and you know the name and you feel comfortable to sharing that in the chat, please do. And if you don't know the name, just put yes. All right, so I'm going to be helping moderate this session tonight along with Kevin Richards from Halt the Harm Network. He'll be running things behind the scene, providing us with essential links and technical support. And so if you need anything, just let him know in the chat. I have been a member of Halt the Harm Network for 3 years. And I began with one of their PFAS accelerator classes. I'm located in South Central Pennsylvania and in Carlisle. And I founded a group called Move Past Plastics. And we are working on addressing single-use plastic through the entire life cycle, from the fracking cracker plant all the way to disposal, of which now these kind of advanced recycling plants are trying to be a part of that. So some of the big campaigns that Move Past Plastic is working on are PFAS, dealing with PFAS, getting municipalities to understand they need to test their drinking water, and that there's going to be, new laws through EPA and here in Pennsylvania, and how to avoid PFAS, a whole bunch of things, and as well as synthetic plane surfaces. Those are two big campaigns that we deal with. We work with many other groups from Beyond Plastic, Plastic Pollution Coalition, Climate Reality, and of course, Halt the Harm connects every one of us. So joining me on the panel tonight are Veena Singla from the National Resource Defense Council and Sandy Fields from Save our Susquehanna and climate reality. Veena Singla is a senior research scientist with the National Research Defense Council, and she does research on the health risks of pollution related to plastics manufacturing, the use and disposal, and works to inform for better policy decisions and people's health. Sandy Field lives in Lewisburg, in a rural central PA. She's the chair of the Susquehanna Valley chapter of Climate Reality, and project that works to encourage people to take action on climate crisis. And she's a leader in the local opposition Save Our Susquehanna, which is trying to stop the Encina power plant in Point Township, PA. So let's, we're going to start this off first with Veena talking to us about the reality of chemical recycling, the impacts, and the myths, separating facts and myths. Then we'll have some time for questions. And then Sandy Field will then talk about the Point Township Encina plant, and then we'll follow up with questions after that. And so just briefly, as I mentioned, tonight's event is hosted by Halt the Harm. And it's just a marvelous place where people from all over the country and even outside of the US can meet and network together, who are working on the similar fights of the petrochemical industry. And we share resources with each other, information, what works, what doesn't work. And it's, you know, the most important thing, I think, in being able to tackle these difficult things is to come together and join forces. And Halt the Harm is a magnificent forum for doing this and for organizing and trying to move legislation and other things. So thank you so much, everybody, for being a part of this tonight. And I encourage you, Kevin will put in the Halt the Harm link to join, and I encourage all of you to join like me, yay! And it's fantastic. And we're gonna turn it over to our first guest speaker, Veena. Veena, take it away.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Appreciate Halt the Harm pulling this event together so I can share more about my research on so-called chemical recycling. So just a little bit more about the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC for short. We're an international environmental nonprofit that employs scientists, lawyers, and policy advocates to advance evidence-based policies to protect human health and the environment. And we have staff and offices across the US, as well as in India and China. So I'm going to talk a little bit just about conventional recycling, chemical recycling, what are the differences, and just what is chemical recycling, and then go into more about what we found when we researched US chemical recycling facilities. Okay, so conventional or mechanical recycling, this is like, to the extent that plastic recycling is happening at all today, this is what's happening, where plastic waste is collected, it's sorted by type, it's cleaned and shredded, made into plastic pellets, and then new plastic can be made out of those pellets and shredded plastic, new products. Now, chemical recycling, I'll say the first thing that's kind of confusing about it is that it's called a lot of different things, and industry is constantly coming up with new branding and new marketing to make it sound better and great. So you might hear advanced recycling, molecular recycling, plastics renewal, carbon renewal, chemically advanced molecular recycling. These are all real terms that have been used to try to promote and advance this so-called chemical recycling. So just be aware that all of these terms are referring to the same kinds of things, even if they're using different words. Now, the second thing that's confusing is that these kind of umbrella terms, when you hear advanced recycling or chemical recycling, it actually refers to a bunch of different processes. It's this kind of umbrella term. So there's different technologies that are all called advanced recycling or chemical recycling. So they're kind of grouped under this same terminology. So it may be technologies like pyrolysis and gasification, or depolymerization, or solvent purification, solvolysis. And here again, we sort of hear different technical terms that industry is coming up with to refer to the same or similar processes, just to try to make it sound like something different or better. So that's another thing to just be on the lookout for. Now, in these different processes, I just want to point out that pyrolysis and gasification specifically, they're what's known as thermal conversion processes. Thermal because they use heat. And both pyrolysis and gasification are classified as waste combustion or incineration under the Clean Air Act. Okay, so what's going on with chemical recycling? So here you can see it's more complicated than conventional recycling. There's many different pathways that this can take. So again, you start with that plastic waste, then you're going to use heat or chemicals or a combination of both to break down that plastic. And then that's those different technical processes like pyrolysis or gasification. Then you can take that broken down plastic, and it might be used to make fuels like similar to diesel or aviation fuel or hydrogen. These are some of the claims that are being made. That fuel then gets burned for energy. That's that top kind of dark orange path. Or you can take that broken down plastic, that's these kind of different chemical components. You can process it further to turn it into new and different chemicals, or in theory, back into plastic. So that's the different pathways that chemical recycling can take. Now, it's really important to point out that in some cases here, that calling it chemical recycling is actually a misnomer, because turning it into fuel or chemicals is not actually recycling. So here in this diagram, you can see the kind of potential life cycle of materials, right? From resource extraction to production, consumption, use, end of life. Now, if the material is actually recycled or recovered, it returns into that material cycle, returns to the production cycle. You can use those materials to make new products, and it reduces the demand for virgin resource extraction. However, if you're turning it into fuel or chemicals there at the end of life, those materials are exiting the production cycle. They're getting burned as fuel. The material is removed and destroyed or turned into something else. So you're not recycling them. You lose that benefit of recycling. When you burn things, there's going to be a continued demand for more resource extraction. So even the name advanced recycling or chemical recycling is not accurate when you're doing these plastic to fuel kinds of processes. Okay, so when I first heard about chemical recycling a couple of years ago, I was really curious about it. It sounded so promising because what I heard was, oh, we can take all these hard to recycle materials and actually recycle them. It's going to be a big solution for our plastic waste problem. So I wanted to know more about what was actually happening here. So what I did was start with industry and NGO reports to compile a list of these potential chemical recycling companies and facilities. So then I narrowed that down to companies that are in the US and were still in business, because there was many that had kind of been announced or proposed but never happened, or started up then shut down quickly. Then I narrowed that down even further to facilities that are near operational or operational, because they had reporting in databases for the Environmental Protection Agency federally, or they had state permit information or data. So that narrowed it down to 8 facilities. And I should say I did this research in 2021. Okay, so here's what I found for the facilities. There's the 8 facilities down the left-hand side there, and then the 5 different sources that I looked at across the top: the state permit data, EPA's Environmental Compliance and History online database, EPA's Toxic Release Inventory or TRI data, EPA's Resource Conservation and Recovery Act data that's reporting on hazardous waste, and then also looking at the demographics of the communities located near and around these facilities using EPA's EJ Screen tool. So you can see there was a variety of data available for some of the facilities, and those asterisks are there to indicate where there wasn't data available in 2021, but it has since become available, and I'll tell you more about that too. Okay, so here's the facilities where they're located around the country. And the first finding was that most of them are doing plastic to fuel, not plastic to plastic, so not actually recycling any plastic. So the ones in the kind of light blue are the plastic to fuel facilities. Okay, next we looked at state permit data, and we found that these facilities are permitted to release a variety of health harming and hazardous air pollution. So this chart shows down the left-hand side the various chemicals that these facilities are permitted to release. And then across the top is the different health hazards that these pollutants have. So you can see a whole bunch of them are cancer-causing chemicals. Some of them are toxic to the reproductive system. Some of them are toxic to the developing fetus. These are health threats of real concern. Then we went and asked, what does the community look like where these facilities are sited? And they're overwhelmingly sited in places that are disproportionately low income or people of color or both. So what we're looking at here is those 8 facilities across the top. And then down the left-hand side, we've got where that facility is located, then the population that's within 3 miles of the facility, and then the demographic breakdown in terms of the percentage that's low income or the different racial ethnic breakdown. And then on the very right-hand side of this is the US average for those demographic characteristics. And then highlighted in orange is where we see that there's a much or significantly higher percentage located around the facility compared to the US as a whole. So So for example, if you look at Nexus Fuels, there in Atlanta, Georgia, you can see that it's where it's cited is a higher percentage low income and a much higher percentage Black than compared to the US average. And all of this information that I just presented is available in our issue brief, and there's a link there. I think Kevin had put it in the chat as well. So here's an update on 2 of the facilities. This is additional information that's become available, and what it really points to is this major problem of these facilities generating large quantities of hazardous waste. So a number of these facilities are registered large quantity hazardous waste generators. That means they're generating or plan to generate 2,200 pounds or more of hazardous waste per month. And you can see here, in 2021, Altera generated 63,000 pounds of hazardous waste that they're located in Ohio. And in 2021, Braven in North Carolina generated 19,000 pounds of hazardous waste. And they were also cited for an imminent and substantial endangerment violation related to their handling and management of hazardous waste. Very concerning for those communities. Agilex in Oregon produced almost 500,000 pounds of hazardous waste in 2019. And just to give y'all a better sense of what it is, you can see here on the left-hand side, what the chemical composition of the hazardous waste was, how much in the middle column, and then how it was disposed. So you can see there's benzene, which is a cancer-causing chemical, some heavy metals like cadmium and chromium that are toxic, and that all of this hazardous waste was sent to different locations for disposal by incineration or burning of some sort. So overall, I just kind of went over a large amount of information, but to sum up, all of these so-called chemical recycling technologies, no matter which one you're talking about, they lack transparency. We are not getting the information that we need from these companies. The information I presented, I was able to find because they're legally required to report it, but they are not forthcoming about additional information about their processes or pollution. All of these technologies are generating harmful air pollution and do one or more of these things. They use hazardous chemicals in their process, they produce hazardous chemicals, and generate hazardous waste. We also found is that these facilities are not operating at scale. If they're operating at all, they're really having difficulties with their processes and their products. And they're generally cited in vulnerable communities. And then also, pyrolysis and gasification, specifically those thermal conversion technologies, their incineration, they're very energy intensive because they use high heat, they're generating hazardous waste, and they're mostly used for plastic to fuel, which is not recycling. And thank you very much. That is all I have. My email is there. And I'll drop it in the chat as well. And I will stop sharing my presentation so we can take some questions.
Vina, thank you so much. That was super informative and very thorough introduction to this complex issue. So if people have questions, just please raise your hand. You're also welcome to write them in the chat. And Marty, your hand was up. If you but it's down now. Holly Kaufman, go ahead and ask your question.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Vina. You're always terrific. So I just was hoping you could comment a bit about the new American Chemistry Council massive campaign where they're willing to spend literally unlimited amounts of money to avoid a cap on plastic production and push recycling, as well as a pro recycling of all kind initiative campaign by the Plastics Industry Association. How are we going to be able to counter that? What are some of the ways we can be most effective against that? Thanks.
Bina, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes, sorry about that. I was having trouble unmuting. Okay, thank you so much for that question, Holly. So first, I would say that the fact that the industry feels the need to launch this big campaign means that we have all been successful actually in getting our message out there that we need to reduce our plastic production and use. We're over consuming, we're overproducing. So they are feeling threatened by the success that we have, and they feel the need to respond. So in that way, I think we can kind of count it as a indication that our messages and our tactics are working. And the other thing I would say that I think it's just so important to emphasize is that we cannot recycle our way out of this problem. Whether you're talking about conventional recycling or chemical recycling or whatever new thing they're going to try to come up with, that is not going to solve the plastic crisis. So I think that's just an important message to keep sharing with all of our friends and colleagues and other people in the movement, because everyone thinks recycling is a good thing, and it certainly can be, but that is not going to solve the plastic problem, and we have to keep pushing on the real solutions that are going to dial back plastic production.
Right. I'll
Yeah,
just throw in here for anybody that even mechanical recycling, you know, it involves all this washing and tumbling and shredding. So it creates a lot of microplastics that get into the air, which hurt the workers, and then into the water with all the inherent human and environmental health problems associated with that. So recycling works great for metal, glass, paper, but not for plastic.
Yeah,
Thank
exactly.
you.
And you know how you've heard them talk about turning off the tap, you know, when they make the analogy with, you know, your bathtub's filling up, are you going to empty it with a teaspoon or turn off the water, kind of thing. So thank you so much, Holly, for that question. And there's Kathy Martin has a question here. Kathy, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you for, fast-paced and exciting presentation. So, of course, I'm always interested about the air permit applications for these facilities and whether or not they're shying away from admitting they're a major source, or they're trying to qualify for synthetic minor, and thus reducing the amount of the Clean Air Act sections that apply and all the best available control technology. And I wondered if you had looked into the actual permit applications or a different evaluation. That was me.
Yes, thank you for that question, Kathy. So I'd say a couple things on this point. That one, generally what we're seeing with the air permits is that they're not considered major sources. A number of them are synthetic minors that have conditions on which they need to, for example, like flare VOCs or things like that. And the other thing I'll say is that they have a variety of designations, right? Like they don't all have the same kind of category. Technically, these facilities that are doing pyrolysis on plastic waste should be municipal solid waste combustors under the Clean Air Act, but not all of them are actually classified as such. So there's a lack of a standard approach to how these facilities are being classified and permitted.
And I think that's one of the reasons why they're coming up with all of these other names, is to get that loophole to get out of that classification, right? So Patty is asking, are the terms gasification and pyrolysis interchangeable, and are they different processes?
Yeah, they're different. I can see Kathy shaking her head. Yes, so they both are considered a thermal conversion technology, but they're different processes. And I would say they have similar concerns in terms of generating harmful air pollution and hazardous waste.
Okay, and then Bruce, I'm going to get you in 1 second. I just want to ask one more question from the chat. Tony is asking, what has been the impact of the Intercept report on the plastic recycling in North Carolina, and are any projects being canceled?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, that was just really excellent reporting on the Braven, North Carolina facility. I think if anyone hasn't seen that article, I highly recommend taking a look. It just lays out how not advanced this is when they're calling it advanced recycling. You see a dumpster full of steaming hazardous waste just sitting in the open, and black, cans of black gunk just sitting around. It is, if that's what they're calling advanced, I'm scared. So definitely go check that out. I'll say we're at NRDC thinking about how we can really amplify the findings and that investigation to decision makers, so that they understand what they're saying yes to if they're trying to permit these kinds of facilities in their communities.
On that note, Vanna, are there any particular anti-chemical recycling legislations out there, and are any that are kind of leading the way as far as good legislation on that we can look at to reference for the different states?
Yes, so there's been a couple states that introduced legislation that would have prohibited these harmful chemical recycling technologies. Maryland did, one other I'm not remembering now. Unfortunately, the bills did not advance or get passed, but it was very useful as well, so to start to educate legislators about what these issues are. And Safer States is a really good resource if you're interested in model bill language. We have one from last year. We're actually working on updating it for the new legislative session. So definitely recommend connecting with Safer States if you're interested in a model bill or bill language to prohibit chemical recycling.
Would you recommend tackling this through state legislation, or all the states pulling together to do a federal legislation?
Yes, I would say yes. And I think industry is pushing on all fronts, and we also need to push on all fronts. So I think wherever you wherever you can, wherever you're able, and like have the connections that trying to push forward will be helpful, because even if you can't get something across the finish line or past, that educational process and that engagement has been really helpful in pushing back on the industry, misrepresentations and propaganda.
Great. So we're going to go to Bruce, and then we are going to get Sandy talking to us about Encina Point Power Plant. Bruce, did you still want to ask your question? You are so patient.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm Bruce's wife.
Okay.
The one that's into the recycling. On a very basic level, if we are trying to investigate as to whether our waste management companies or those that we've entrusted our plastics to be actually recycled, if we want to find out where they're actually going with the various recycling, does that fall under the Right to Know Act?
That's a great question. I'm not sure. I don't know, Tamala, do you have a sense of that?
That was going to be one of the questions I was going to ask people I'm working with a Thriving Earth grant, is because when I call my local municipal waste management and try to talk to the manager to ask them specific questions, they do not want to talk. So that was one question I had too. So I will just tell you, I will look into it and get back to it. Sandy, do you have any information on that Right to Know for
No,
where
I
our waste
don't.
management goes?
No, I thought naively I could pick up the phone and ask.
Yeah, like me. All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Vienna. Sandy, go ahead and do your sharing of your PowerPoint slides and let us know what's happening with Encina and save our Susquehanna.
Okay, give me just 1 second. All right. Can you see that? All right. So I am representing a local group of people. We are calling ourselves Save Our Susquehanna, which you will see why in just a moment. We are trying to raise awareness about exactly all the stuff that Vina just talked about the proposed Encina advanced recycling plant. The plant is proposed to be built along the Susquehanna River in Point Township in central Pennsylvania. It's going to process 450,000 tons of post-consumer plastic every year. They're saying it's going to do mostly the number 3 to number 7 plastics that are harder to recycle. And then they're going to use a catalytic pyrolysis process so that thermal heating of plastic in the presence of a proprietary catalyst. And they hide behind that proprietary word all the time to not tell us a lot of things all the time. And then they're going to take the pyrolysis oil from that process and fractionate it into chemicals, benzene, toluene, xylene, and propylene, which are volatile organic chemicals, ship them along the river to customers who will make more plastic from it. And so they're saying that this is going to be a circular process. I just want to, at this point, just tell you that this is going to be along the Susquehanna River. The Susquehanna River, the North Branch along where this plant was going to be, was Pennsylvania's River of the Year this year. This river is central to our whole life in rural Pennsylvania. We drink from this river, we boat on this river, we fish from it. It's everything to us. it characterizes our whole area. The plant, the company's name is Encina. They're from Texas. They say that the plant will be a $1.1 billion plant to build, and there's going to be 300 full-time jobs. For some time, they were saying with an average salary of $75,000 a year. But we started to kind of say, well, so if somebody makes, you know, 5 million and the rest of the people make 30,000, you know, isn't that an average of 75,000? So they stopped saying that, and we're not sure about the 300 jobs. That has changed from 75 to 300 to more or less over the year and a half that we've been aware of this plant. They have no record of success with a similar plant. They say that they have a pilot plant in San Antonio, Texas. We have found no evidence of that. There's no air permit for a similar smaller plant. From what we can tell, it's a series of laboratories that do parts of the process, but none of them do the entire process altogether. So this would be the first plant of its kind. As far as we can tell, the funding is not in place yet for this plant. They say it's going to be $1 billion plant. We've looked into the funding. As far as we can tell, they have about $55 million. And this is a concern because one of the things that characterizes these plants, which Vina didn't really go into, is that they rely on money, subsidies, tax breaks, and things from government. So from local government or from state government. Often these plants rely on this kind of money. So they do have one local group that one local kind of benefit, which is that the local development entity called Drive has bought the land. It's a 100-acre piece of land. They paid $4.5 million for it, and they're currently leasing it to the company for $28,000 a month. And I already mentioned the part about the tax breaks. As far as we can tell, they don't have other tax breaks that they're getting. The plant is going to be built in 2 phases. The first phase is washing and sorting. So just bringing in all the plastic, washing it with 2.9 million gallons of water per day from our river, washing and sorting it into the different numbers, getting rid of all of the gunk that comes in with post-consumer plastic, all the labels, everything, all that stuff. And then it goes into the phase 2, which is the big bad, the catalytic pyrolysis, right? And this is where it'll be melted, and then the pyrolysis oil will be created, and all of the air pollution will come, and then they'll be vaporizing that to make the benzene and the toluene and xylene and so forth. The water is going to be processed on site as waste and then put back into the river. The company says that they will, they're contracting with a company called Veolia, which has a kind of a bad track record for what this kind of wastewater treatment. But even if they follow the letter of the law and they do everything they should, the law right now does not require them to remove forever chemicals, so PFAS chemicals, or microplastic from the water that they use in washing and sorting the plastic. So those things could go back into the river. Although the company does claim that the water will be cleaner than when they got it out. The concerns of our group, the Save Our Susquehanna group, are that the site is actually in the 100-year floodplain of the Susquehanna River. And people in our area, what we say is it's not, you know, if the river will flood, but when it floods. And it's a very shallow river. So the impacts of water pollution will be significant on the river. The impacts of, you know, the heating up of the water before they discharge it back into the river will be significant on the river. And if you've been paying attention to the climate crisis, which I know you all have, 100-year floodplain was defined some time ago, and it is no longer the 100-year floodplain. It's the 50-year floodplain or the 5-year floodplain. We just don't know, but we do know that it will flood. We're concerned about air pollution from the vaporization of the plastics, from burning of natural gas or other fuels to power the process, emissions from flaring. I mentioned water pollution already. Many people in our local area are concerned about traffic, 100 trucks per day. So one every 5 minutes full of post-consumer plastic waste. That's 100 trucks going in and 100 trucks coming back out. In an area that's very rural, very small, we already have traffic problems at the 2 intersections where the trucks would be going through. We're concerned about light and noise pollution. There's a neighborhood right across the street from this site. You can see these 2 images. The top one is the shell cracker plant, what they said it would look like in Western Pennsylvania. The bottom is, of course, what it does look like now that it's built. So these are just the kind of things that we can expect from building this kind of refinery in a rural area. We're concerned about the toxic chemicals being stored on the site, flood and fire and leaks, and transportation of those by rail along our river. We're concerned about flooding along the river that could potentially cause problems with the rail lines. These rail lines have been around for a long time. They're not often used, and so they're not in good repair. So it's very easy to imagine a derailment along the river with a tank car full of benzene, 32,000 gallons or something of benzene from this process. Other concerns that we have are things that Vina sort of alluded to, that the messaging has been changing for these plants. So when we first heard about it, they were calling the process vaporization. And then when I met with them later, they said, we never said vaporization, it's catalytic pyrolysis. And then they've also called it melting. So this concerns us because if you're building a $1 billion plant that does a chemistry process, you should know what that process is. We're concerned that phase 1 has already received an exemption as an advanced recycling plant. So that's classified as a manufacturing plant, which has lower requirements in terms of regulations. But the phase 1 part isn't even the advanced recycling part, and they've already got the exemption. Clean Air Council tried to appeal that, but they lost that appeal. And we're also concerned that they've split it into 2 phases because the first one, the washing and sorting, sounds like a more benign process. And once that's built, how are we going to say no to phase 2, right? So we think that phase 1 is a Trojan horse for phase 2. And I mentioned the concerns we have about the pilot plant that's not operational. We have no data from like a proposed air permit there on what might be coming out of this plant. And no one else has been able to do this, as Vina mentioned, without generating tons of hazardous waste. They haven't mentioned that at all. So that's the end. I'm hoping to get a lot of questions because there's a lot more I can tell you about this plant and our actions in central Pennsylvania. So thank you very much.
That's fantastic, Sandy. It's good to focus on one plant like that, and I'm sure so many others have the same exact issues. So anybody have any questions? You're welcome to raise your hand. I have one for you, Sandy. Some of the people, were talking again about the Pennsylvania switching the certification from it not being the solid waste. But would the EPA's overriding still categorizing it under the solid waste still apply?
Yeah, so we don't know. We think that the EPA ruling, so this is the ruling that I alluded to, that they've already gotten an exemption as an advanced recycling facility to be classified as a manufacturing facility that lets them out of a bunch of regulations. And that's based on a law that Pennsylvania passed. The EPA has chosen not to do that. But it's kind of they're not doing it. So, but whether, it's going to trickle down fast enough for this site. I mean, they're saying they want to start construction soon, but they haven't got their permits in place yet. So we're hoping that it will at least create, we're hoping that it'll have two impacts. Right now, that it will cost them money because they're going to have to do more regulations associated with being a waste incinerator. And second, that it will create regulatory uncertainty around the plant that will chase away investors. But as far as whether that's going to happen, at this point, we don't know. And maybe, Vina, do you have an opinion about that that's different or? Okay.
No, that's exactly right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Michael, go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, it's more of a comment than a question. I'm not sure if any of you guys have ever been to the Woodlands in Woodlands, Texas, but I'm from Houston. And what I can say is that the Woodlands would never allow for a plastic plant to be built in their community. So as a community strategist with Taproot Earth, one thing that I'm embarking on is having people from different parts of Appalachia and the Gulf South begin to talk with each other to organize solidarity rides so that the different regions can understand what's happening in each of their regions, but also begin to work in solidarity because frontline leaders in Texas aren't aware of, a company from Texas that's impacting a community in Appalachia. And so, we really have to start conversing and being in solidarity across regional lines. And so this was a very powerful presentation and I learned a lot. But again, the Woodlands, Texas is pristine, one of those communities that would not allow for this type of pollution and contamination in their community.
I am so glad you said that because they come into our community and they say, we came here because there's universities where we can hire skilled people and, and this is such a great place for us. And I didn't know that about where they come from. So that's something that we can use. So thank you so much. I will say that this particular community is not actually an environmental justice community. It's rural, but the Point Township supervisors at the meeting that I was at last year said, we don't need this money. We don't need this plant. If people here don't want this, we don't have to allow it to happen. And so that's something that we're clinging to, but downstream just 4 miles, there is an environmental justice community and they're going to be getting that microplastic in their water. And so we're fighting for them too, but thank you for telling me that because that is something we can use.
Yeah, and this is exactly what Halt the Harm is about, is making these connections, sharing what's working, sharing what's not working, getting us to work together as a unit. So Michael, we'll be reaching out and everyone else who's working on this, keep posted, sign up to be on the Halt the Harm. So we can join forces. Kathy, do you still have a question or comment?
I'm trying to find something because I worked on the Fulcrum Centerpoint facility in Gary, Indiana, and they have a companion facility in Reno, Nevada, where they're taking plastic waste from municipal and turning it into jet fuel. And Indiana passed, I put it in the chat, they passed a similar state law that redefined this as not a solid waste facility. And anyway, I was going to try to find some paperwork to help, but I think it's already said.
Okay, well, good. Look at it. Jane is asking in the chat, does anyone know what process is used by the CRDC global plant in York, PA? Are you? CRDC, what's the acronym stand for? I think I know this,
I
but
know there's a coal plant down there that discharges water into the river and kills fish every so often, but I don't know of anything else down there in York.
Jane, are you talking about the incinerator down there? Because I know that York has a big incinerator. Is that the CRDC?
It's a place where they take all plastic, 1 through 7 or 8. They somehow transform it into these little pellets, and the little pellets are supposed to be used as a substitute for sand to make concrete blocks.
Oh, yeah. That's the plastic to brick. Yeah.
Yeah,
building.
so what is their process? Does anybody know?
Not there.
It might be mechanical, making nurdles. There
Yeah.
might be some breakdown, but I mean, especially if they're post-consumer, they're going to have to get rid of all of the trash and everything. And I don't know, maybe they don't worry about the dyes, but there's all the stickers and all the Point Township supervisor used the phrase, everything is in that plastic from ketchup to Roundup. And it just tells you everything you need to know about post-consumer waste and all of the hazardous materials that you don't know what they are that are going to be in that plastic. So I know that they probably use the washing and sorting part first, and then I don't know after that, Jane.
And yeah, then it gets shredded, and then it gets put with binders and pressed and maybe heated. Every one of those brick technology things are a little different, but it's still it's number one, we have way too much plastic for that to become a real solution and be real helpful. And number two, you're just re-exposing the chemical toxicities by turning it into basically microplastic pieces and having them go through the air. When you do get those bricks made, you're still having UV sunlight and quote weathering happening on them, which is going to release chemicals and microplastics in perpetuity. Some of them say, they're not fire hazards, that they're, but they're still made of petrochemicals. So I'm not real sure. But yeah. Well, we're almost at the hour. So I'd like to just do a follow-up question for each of you here. And the question is, what do you think can be our next steps to try and stop these chemical plants from these proposed chemical plants from being built?
I don't know. We Save Our Susquehanna, we are throwing everything at this. We don't know what the thing is that's going to stick, and we are doing all the stuff, the endangered species, the permits, the public meetings, the talking to our representatives. We are doing it all. I mean, it has to come down legislatively, of course, to stop permitting these, speaking to your representatives and things, but we have to have a national shift away from thinking that somebody put in the chat, plastics are the oil and gas industry's plan B, and we can't let them go to plan B. It's clear that recycling is not the answer to the plastics crisis, and we have to accept that. And so I just think we just have to keep pushing, have an outcry. And I'll tell you, every single conversation I have with somebody about Encina, it starts with, wait a minute, don't I like recycling? And yeah. Then I have to explain why we don't like recycling, why plastics can't be recycled. And once people hear the explanation, they totally get it. So we just have to, everybody has to totally get it.
Yeah. One thing that I thought of, I'm a master watershed steward and on my board of the Conneaut Creek Watershed Association, which goes into the Susquehanna near Harrisburg and everything. And I know the master watershed stewards, the watershed groups, all up and down Susquehanna, and especially from, you know, where this is being put in and down, would be a really good outreach to, and the information to, and get them on your side, as well as Chesapeake Bay Foundation, because over 50% of the water flowing into Chesapeake Bay is coming from the Susquehanna River Basin. And so reaching out to them, finding out where they are on this issue and getting them involved in the fight might be helpful as well. So those are some ideas. Fina, did you have anything to add?
Yes, I'll be brief because I know we're a little past time. Appreciate everyone who's stayed on. I would say yes, whatever you can do fighting proposals in your community, that is huge, because when people push back at the local level, you just really see how we can use that to say, like, nobody wants this, people don't want this, and like in their communities or near them, as well as trying to get involved and support other organizations that are doing this work to push back at the state level, at the federal level. I mentioned Safer States. I also dropped in the chat a link to the Break Free from Plastics Pollution Coalition. You can join as an individual member. You can join as an organizational member. We're doing a lot of work at the local, state, federal, and international level on the plastics treaty to really push the real solutions. So encourage that. And two other things, you know, when you get those petitions, that's like, you know, sign to you know, tell your state legislator, you know, to support this, that, or the other. Or I know we all get tons of email and tons of these requests to sign on to things, but it actually does make a difference, because then organizations like NRDC can go and deliver those to Congress, to state legislators, and say, we have 500,000 people who say they, you know, don't do this, or they don't want this. So it really does make a difference, as do these small dollar donations you can make to support organizations. You know, just giving $5, $10, it makes a difference. It all adds up. So all of those actions you can take can make a positive impact.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming this evening and sharing this information with each other and asking your wonderful questions. Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Vena. And we appreciate all your work in helping to inform us and set us on the right path. And finally, thank you, Halt the Harm, for hosting this wonderful webinar, and we look forward to many opportunities to
I think Tamla froze at the last second, but I was going to say thank you. Big thanks to Tamla tonight for hosting and sharing her story and being an incredible moderator and leading us through a great set of questions. My name is Kevin Richardson. Again, I'm with Halt the Harm Network. Appreciate all of y'all joining us tonight. We will send out the recording for this, and Ryan Clover dropped in the link, a chat to an Halt the Harm orientation session. Encourage you all to check it out. And yeah, thanks so much for everything that everyone does. We appreciate everyone being a part of this learning experience and fighting the good fight against chemical recycling and against the harms of oil and gas industry. So thanks y'all, and we'll see you at the next event.
Thanks for the invitation to speak. Appreciate it.